Chapter 1. The Rise of the King. In the heart of the vast ocean, far from the reach of human civilization, lies Atlantis, an ancient kingdom submerged beneath the waves, where the sun's light dances across golden temples, and the power of the deep holds sway. The kingdom of Atlantis had flourished for centuries, a beacon of prosperity and wisdom, shielded by the magic of the ocean and its timeless rulers. But the peace they had enjoyed was fragile, and the threats lurking in the shadows were growing ever stronger. For years, Atlantis had been ruled by a council of wise elders, but the time had come for a new leader, a king who could not only govern, but protect, a king who could fight the unseen enemies that sought to tear Atlantis apart. The kingdom needed someone strong, unyielding, and fearless, someone who would defend it with his very life. Thus, from the depths of the royal bloodline, a warrior was chosen, Prince Thalor, a young man, barely into his 30s, but already known for his strength, wisdom, and unmatched combat skills. His lineage traced back to the very founders of Atlantis, and his name was whispered with reverence by the people. With dark, piercing eyes and a commanding presence, Thalor exuded the air of a leader who would not bend to the tides of fate. His hair, a silvery gray that shone like moonlight on the ocean, was a mark of his connection to the ancient wisdom of Atlantis. His body was a canvas of muscle, shaped by years of rigorous training, and his resolve was as solid as the ocean's bedrock. His most prized possession, the triple-headed staff, was not just a symbol of his authority, but a weapon forged from the deepest trenches of the sea, imbued with powers to defend the kingdom against any threat. The staff was said to have been created by the gods themselves, with each head representing an aspect of Atlantis, one for its strength, one for its wisdom, and one for its protection. When Thalor wielded the staff, the ocean seemed to respond to his will, as if it recognized its true king. With it, he could command the tides, summon the creatures of the deep, and bring forth waves of fury to vanquish those who dared to harm his people. The moment Thalor ascended to the throne, the winds of change swept through the kingdom. His first decree was swift, a purge of the criminal syndicates that had begun to fester beneath the surface of Atlantis. These rogue factions, long unseen by the elders, had started to corrupt the underbelly of the kingdom. They had trafficked in forbidden magics, stolen from the royal treasury, and spread dissent among the people. Thalor could feel the rot spreading, and he would not let it destroy his beloved Atlantis. The city of Atlantis itself was vast and awe-inspiring, built upon coral reefs that rose like towers from the ocean floor, interwoven with ancient glowing seaweed and bioluminescent creatures that illuminated the dark waters. The palace stood at its heart, a grand structure of ivory and jade, surrounded by marble columns and pools of shimmering water. But beneath the beauty, a dark force had begun to stir. The criminal factions led by shadowy figures who had long operated in secrecy had begun to organize. They had learned to manipulate the magic of the sea, using it for their own gain. They had begun to unravel the fabric of the kingdom, sowing chaos and corruption wherever they could. Thalor knew that if he did not act swiftly, the once proud city of Atlantis would fall to ruin. He stood on the balcony of his palace, gazing out over the endless expanse of the ocean. The wind whispered through his silver hair as the waves crashed against the city's walls, a reminder of the power that lay beneath. Atlantis was a kingdom of peace, but peace was only achievable through strength. King Thalor, a voice called from behind him. Thalor turned to find his trusted advisor, Elira, a woman of unmatched intelligence and grace, standing in the doorway. Her dark hair was tied back in a loose braid, and her sharp eyes reflected the worries of the kingdom. She was a fierce protector of Atlantis, and her loyalty to Thalor was unwavering. "What news, Elira?" Thalor asked, his voice calm but heavy with the weight of responsibility. "The criminal factions grow bolder, my king," she replied, her voice grave. "They've begun recruiting more powerful magic users, and their influence has spread to the outskirts of the city. We have reports of attacks on the outer districts, raids on our resources, and kidnappings of our people." Thalor's jaw tightened. "It is as I feared. The kingdom is under threat, and I will not let it fall. Gather the council. I will confront this menace myself." Elira hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "My king, you cannot face them alone. These criminals are unlike any we have encountered before. They wield forbidden magic, and their numbers are growing." Thalor's eyes hardened, his resolve unshaken. "I will not wait for them to strike at the heart of Atlantis. I will fight for my people, for my kingdom, and I will destroy anyone who dares threaten it." With a final nod, Thalor turned to leave, his staff in hand. The triple-headed weapon glowed faintly as he strode toward the gates of the palace, his steps unwavering. The time had come to rid Atlantis of the criminals that plagued it. He would not allow the kingdom to fall into darkness. As he marched into the depths of the city, the sound of his footsteps echoed like a drumbeat, signaling the beginning of a new era. The king of Atlantis had risen, and he would stop at nothing to protect his people, even if it meant facing the greatest threats his kingdom had ever known. The tides were changing, and King Thalor would be the one to command them. Chapter 2. The Battle Beneath the Waves. King Thalor stood at the heart of Atlantis, feeling the pulse of his kingdom beneath his feet. The city, built upon towering coral reefs and vast underwater caverns, seemed alive with energy, its glowing lights illuminating the sea's depths. But even in the beauty of this majestic place, a shadow lurked, one that threatened to swallow everything in its path. The air in the palace was thick with tension as Thalor gathered his council. Around the circular table, the brightest minds and fiercest warriors of Atlantis sat, their faces grim. They had seen the growing unrest, heard the rumors of criminal factions rising in the dark corners of their world. But none of them had anticipated the full scale of the threat. "My king," Elira spoke first, her voice steady yet filled with concern. "We've been tracking the criminal syndicates for weeks now. They are more organized than we thought, and their leaders, they are not mere thieves or criminals. These men and women command powerful magic, forbidden magic." Thalor clenched his fists, his sharp eyes narrowing. "I know. I've seen their work. They've begun manipulating the ocean's currents, using ancient magic to control the tides and sea creatures for their own gain. They've even started kidnapping Atlantean children, those with the potential to wield magic. Their ultimate goal is to control the kingdom from the shadows." The room fell silent as the weight of his words settled over the council. It was a nightmare scenario, one they had only whispered about in hushed tones. The idea that such dark forces had infiltrated their society, threatening to tear apart the very fabric of their civilization, was almost too much to bear. "But we cannot let them succeed," Thalor continued, his voice low but full of authority. "They've underestimated the power of Atlantis, and they've underestimated me." He rose from his seat, his towering figure casting a long shadow across the marble floor. The triple-headed staff gleamed in his hand, its intricate carvings pulsating with ancient magic. The 3 heads of the staff, each representing strength, wisdom, and protection, seemed to hum with an energy of their own. Thalor could feel the power coursing through him as he gripped the staff, his connection to Atlantis itself strengthening with each passing second. "We must strike now," Thalor declared. "I will not wait for them to grow stronger. The time for action is now." Elyra nodded, her face resolute. "Where do you intend to strike, my king?" Thalor's eyes scanned the map of Atlantis laid out before him. It depicted the sprawling city, the hidden corners, and the depths where the criminal syndicates were believed to be operating. Their headquarters, a dark fortress hidden beneath the ruins of an ancient temple, was their most likely stronghold. "We strike at their heart," Thalor said, "the temple ruins. We'll lead a force to confront them directly." Elyra hesitated for a moment, then spoke carefully. "My king, this is a dangerous mission. We know little of their numbers or the full extent of their power. Even with your strength and the staff, we may be walking into a trap." "I know the risks," Thalor replied, his voice unwavering. "But if we don't act now, Atlantis will fall. I will not allow that to happen." The council members exchanged looks, but one by one they nodded in agreement. There was no turning back now. Atlantis was under siege, and its fate rested on the shoulders of its king. The next day, as dawn broke over the kingdom, Thalor gathered his warriors, elite fighters and mages loyal to Atlantis, at the city's gates. The sea around them was calm, but Thalor could sense the storm brewing beneath the surface. The ocean itself seemed to stir in anticipation, as if the kingdom's fate was being decided in that very moment. Elyra, standing by his side, handed him a shield adorned with the emblem of Atlantis, 2 intertwined dolphins, symbolizing unity and strength. It was a symbol that had been passed down through generations, a reminder of what they fought to protect. As Thalor took the shield, he felt the weight of his ancestors' legacy pressing down on him. "We move out at once," Thalor commanded. The procession moved through the streets, warriors and mages marching in unison, their armor gleaming in the light of the underwater city. The people of Atlantis watched them as they passed, their faces filled with a mixture of fear and hope. They had not seen such a display of strength in years, and many prayed that their king's resolve would be enough to protect them. As they reached the edge of the city, Thalor mounted his war chariot, a massive sea creature, part whale, part shark, pulling it through the waters. His warriors followed on foot, riding aquatic steeds bred for battle. The sea itself seemed to open before them, parting to allow the king and his army to pass. The journey to the temple ruins was perilous, taking them deep into uncharted waters where dark forces were said to dwell. The ocean, once a source of life and strength, had become a deadly expanse, filled with ancient creatures and dark magic. Thalor knew that they were not just battling criminals, but a force that sought to corrupt the very essence of Atlantis itself. Hours passed before they reached their destination. The ancient temple stood in ruins, its towering columns broken and covered in seaweed. The air was thick with an eerie stillness. broken only by the occasional crash of waves against the stone. This was no ordinary temple. It was a place of ancient power, a place where the magic of Atlantis had once been harnessed for good. But now it had become a den of darkness. Thalor dismounted his chariot, his warriors fanning out around him. His staff crackled with energy, and he felt the tension in the air. The criminal syndicates were close. He could feel their presence, lurking in the shadows. Suddenly, a voice echoed from the darkness, a deep, guttural laugh that sent chills down Thalor's spine. "So, the king has come to claim his kingdom back," the voice sneered. From the shadows emerged a figure, tall and cloaked in black. His face was hidden, but his eyes gleamed with malicious intent. Behind him, several other figures stepped forward, their forms wrapped in dark robes, their hands crackling with forbidden magic. Thalor raised his staff, the three heads glowing with power as he prepared for the battle ahead. The time for diplomacy had passed. Atlantis was at war, and he would fight to the death to protect it. "Prepare yourselves," Thalor commanded, his voice cold and filled with determination. The battle for Atlantis begins now. Chapter 3. The Clash Beneath the Deep. The silence was shattered by a crackling surge of magic as Thalor's staff glowed with a brilliant light. The criminals, their dark robes fluttering like shadows, stood poised, their eyes filled with malevolent power. The leader of the syndicate stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with an otherworldly glow. "You are too late, King Thalor," the figure hissed, his voice cold and commanding. "Atlantis is already ours, the city, the magic, and even the ocean itself. Soon we will control it all." Thalor's eyes narrowed, and he gripped his triple-headed staff with determination. "You underestimate the heart of Atlantis," he said, his voice unwavering. "This kingdom will never fall into the hands of darkness. Not while I stand." The criminals laughed, a cruel sound that echoed through the ruins of the ancient temple. Thalor felt the tension build in the water around them, the magic of the ocean itself bristling with anticipation. He could sense the danger, but he also knew the depth of his power. The ocean was not just his kingdom, it was his ally. The triple-headed staff responded to his will, ready to unleash its magic at the first strike. Without warning, the criminal leader raised his hand, and the water around them began to churn. Dark currents swirled, creating a vortex that pulled at Thalor's feet, threatening to drag him into the abyss. But he was prepared. With a powerful swing of his staff, he commanded the water to freeze, sending shock waves through the vortex, causing it to crack and dissipate. The criminal leader sneered. "Impressive, King. But it won't be enough." He raised his hands once again, and the water surged around them, this time forming monstrous sea creatures, ancient, twisted beings with scales of darkness and eyes glowing with hunger. They surged toward Thalor and his warriors, their teeth bared and their bodies thrashing. The Atlantean warriors sprang into action, drawing their weapons and launching into battle. Thalor moved with fluid grace, his muscles honed for combat. His staff crackled with energy as he swung it in wide arcs, summoning the power of the ocean to strike down the sea creatures. Waves of energy rippled outward from the staff, sending the monsters reeling back into the depths. The battle raged on, the water around them a battlefield of magic and steel. Thalor's warriors fought fiercely, but the criminals had summoned an army of dark creatures, their powers far beyond anything the Atlanteans had faced. Yet Thalor remained resolute, his determination unwavering. Fight for Atlantis, he bellowed, his voice ringing through the chaos. We will not be taken down by these shadows. He swung his staff once more, this time focusing all his energy into the central head. The ocean itself responded, and a massive wave shot out from the staff, crashing into the twisted creatures and sending them spiraling into the depths of the sea. The air filled with the roar of the water, the crashing wave turning the tide of the battle in Thalor's favor. But as the monsters fell, the criminal leader remained untouched, his eyes locked onto Thalor with a cold, calculating gaze. You fight well, but you will not win this battle, King, he said, his voice laced with venom. Atlantis is already doomed. The corruption has spread too far. Thalor felt a flicker of doubt, but he pushed it aside. I will never let my kingdom fall. The criminal leader's eyes gleamed with an unnatural light, and he began to chant in a language Thalor didn't recognize. The air grew thick with dark magic, and the water around them began to tremble. Thalor could feel the presence of something ancient, something powerful, rising from the depths. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shook violently, and the waters around the ruins began to warp and twist. A monstrous serpentine figure emerged from the depths, an ancient sea dragon, its scales black as night, and its eyes burning with a fiery hatred. The creature's massive form rose up from the water, towering over the battlefield. Thalor's heart sank. This was no ordinary creature. It was an ancient being bound by dark magic, a creature that had been awakened to serve the criminal syndicate's twisted goals. The dragon's roar echoed through the ruins, sending ripples of fear through the Atlantean warriors. Do not falter, Thalor shouted to his people, his voice carrying across the battlefield. We have faced worse and prevailed. This is not the end. He raised his staff high, and the ocean responded once again, answering his call. The water surged around him, swirling into a massive vortex that lifted Thalor into the air, carrying him toward the dragon. His heart raced with the anticipation of the battle to come. He knew that this fight would test every ounce of his strength, but he would not back down. Atlantis was counting on him. With a mighty roar, Thalor hurled his staff toward the dragon, and the ocean itself surged to his command. The staff's central head, glowing with an intense, blinding light, shot forward like a spear of pure energy. The dragon hissed, its massive jaws opening wide to strike, but Thalor's attack was faster. The energy from the staff slammed into the creature's side, sending shockwaves through the air. For a moment, the dragon seemed to falter, its massive body reeling from the impact. Thalor seized the opportunity. With all his might, he summoned the full power of Atlantis, drawing on the energy of the sea and the strength of his ancestors. The ocean obeyed, and with a mighty blast of energy, Thalor struck the dragon again. The creature let out a deafening roar as it was consumed by the light, its body twisting and thrashing. With one final, desperate cry, the dragon was banished back into the depths, disappearing beneath the waves as the waters settled. But the battle was far from over. The criminal leader, seeing his beast fall, let out a guttural scream of rage. This is not over, King Thalor. We will rise again. Atlantis will be ours. Thalor's eyes blazed with fury. Not as long as I stand. He raised his staff once more, its power crackling through the air. The battle was far from over, but Thalor knew that the tides were beginning to turn. The forces of darkness had been dealt a severe blow, but there was still much work to be done before Atlantis could truly be free. With unwavering determination, He prepared for the final confrontation. The future of Atlantis depended on this moment, and Thalor would stop at nothing to ensure that his kingdom would stand strong and unyielding against the forces that sought to destroy it. Chapter 4. The Fall of the Darkness. The air was thick with tension as King Thalor stood at the heart of the ruined temple, his triple-headed staff raised high. The criminals were regrouping, their dark energy swirling around them like a storm. But Thalor's resolve was unshaken. The battle was nearing its peak, and he could feel the weight of Atlantis's future resting on his shoulders. The dark forces had struck at the heart of his kingdom, but he would not let them win. The criminal leader, now seething with rage, stepped forward, his hands crackling with forbidden magic. "You think you can defeat us, Thalor?" he sneered, his voice dripping with malice. "You are but one king, and Atlantis is already lost. We have spread our influence too far. The city is in chaos. You are fighting a war you cannot win." Thalor's eyes burned with determination. "You do not understand Atlantis, nor do you understand me. I am not just a king. I am the protector of this kingdom, and I will fight to my last breath to save it." The words echoed through the temple, and for a moment there was a tense silence. Then, with a howl of fury, the criminal leader raised his hands to the sky. The waters around them began to churn, growing darker and more violent. The sky above seemed to crackle with dark energy, and Thalor knew that his enemy was about to unleash something far more dangerous than the sea dragon. "Prepare yourself, Thalor," the leader hissed. "This is the end." The sky seemed to split open, and from the dark clouds above, a torrent of black water poured down, swirling around the criminal leader like a storm. The waters lashed out, forming jagged, razor-sharp shapes that seemed to attack everything in their path. Thalor's warriors braced themselves for the oncoming onslaught, but it was clear that this was no ordinary storm. It was magic of the highest, most destructive order. But Thalor stood his ground. His staff hummed with energy, and the ocean responded to his call. He felt the presence of the ancient magic that flowed through Atlantis, and he drew upon its power, summoning it to his side. With a fierce cry, Thalor plunged the staff into the ground, and the ocean erupted in response. The waters around him swirled in a massive vortex, countering the dark storm and pushing back the destructive energy. The ocean that had once been a weapon in the enemy's hands was now an ally once more. The storm howled and crackled, but Thalor held firm, his eyes locked on the criminal leader. "You will not destroy Atlantis," he declared, his voice steady. "The ocean belongs to the people of this kingdom, and I will fight until my last breath to keep it safe." The criminal leader screamed in fury, his face contorted with madness. "You are nothing," he shouted, raising his hands to summon more dark magic. But it was too late. Thalor's power had reached its peak, and the ocean responded with a force that was beyond the enemy's control. With a massive wave of energy, Thalor unleashed the full might of Atlantis. The dark waters surrounding the criminal leader recoiled, the dark magic shattering in the wake of the ocean's raw power. The leader was caught in the wave, his body thrown back into the depths as the storm collapsed around them. Thalor's warriors, emboldened by his strength, surged forward, striking down the remaining criminals who had attempted to rally their forces. The once feared syndicate was now broken, their magic dissipating into nothingness. But Thalor did not celebrate. He stood in the midst of the ruined temple, his chest heaving with exertion. The battle was won, but the cost had been high. Atlantis had been wounded, but it was not broken. He could feel the weight of the kingdom's history pressing down on him, the responsibility of a king who had saved his people. The water around him began to calm, and the ancient magic of Atlantis hummed softly in the air. Thalor closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the connection to the ocean, to the land, to his people. It was a bond that could never be severed. Aelira, standing by his side, approached him cautiously. "You did it, my king," she said softly. "Atlantis is safe." Thalor nodded, his expression serious. "For now, but the fight is never truly over. There will always be forces that threaten the peace of Atlantis. We must remain vigilant." The people of Atlantis began to gather, their faces filled with awe and gratitude. They had witnessed the king's strength, his unwavering determination, and his power over the very seas that had given them life. They knew that Thalor was not just a ruler, but a protector, one who would stand against any darkness to ensure that Atlantis would thrive. As the city began to rebuild, Thalor looked out over the horizon, the vast ocean stretching endlessly before him. He had fought for the survival of Atlantis, and he had won. But the ocean was a living, breathing force, and he knew that as long as it flowed, there would always be challenges to face, forces to battle. But Thalor was not afraid. He was the king of Atlantis, and he would face whatever came next with the full strength of his will, the power of his ancestors, and the unbreakable bond he shared with the ocean. And as the sun set over the kingdom, Thalor knew that Atlantis would remain strong, its future bright, as long as he stood at its helm.